It is exactly 6 o'clock, uncharacteristically for an event sponsored by the Center for Latin American Studies. We're going to start on the hour tonight. My name's Ted Fisher. I'm the director of the Center for Latin American Studies, and I wanted to welcome you here and let you know that we have a special commitment at Vanderbilt to Haiti. We offer Haitian Creole language instruction. We have any number of student groups and medical missions that go down to Haiti over the year. And so this month of February, we're highlighting Haiti. And the event tonight is part of that. And in 2 weeks, on February 19th, we'll have Dr. Paul Farmer in town to discuss his work in Haiti as well. I'm going to ask Celso Castillo to introduce our guest tonight. Celso?
Good evening and welcome. And just to give you a little bit of overview of what to expect tonight. We will be proceeding after this very brief and much more heartfelt and sophisticated literary analysis introduction with Edwidge Danticat, and we will then take questions in a moderated session up until about 7:15, and afterwards there will be an opportunity to purchase books and to have them signed and meet the author. This event came together as a result of many years of work on the classes steering committee and other departments that have been involved with putting this together. I wanted to recognize and offer our special thanks to not only Ted Fisher, the director, Avery Dicons de Giron, Nicoe Costu, Colleen McCoy, Alma Paz San Miguel for facilitating it and for ensuring that all the different events have worked out as smoothly as they have. I cannot begin to convey to you the honor that it is to introduce Edwidge Danticat. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your warmth with Vanderbilt University and the Nashville community. I know that I can speak for us all when I say that our admiration runs deep. For decades, we've turned to you for perspective and direction, for reflection and inspiration. With regards to that aspiration that we all have, that we want to move the conversation forward, that we want to foster understanding and collaboration, I want you to know that from my vantage point as an educator, as someone born abroad and raised here, you've made it easier for those coming after you. Thank you. Danticat's rich explorations of migration and identity, gender and belonging, family and history is changing the nature of the questions we discuss in class, the perspective from which we analyze political and cultural processes, and fundamentally demonstrating to younger and older readers alike the power of female authorship. This is expressed so vividly in one of her children's books, Mama's Nightingale, which has, because of my own life, now become one of my favorites, where the young Saya takes to writing letters to local newspapers to help get her mother out of a detention center. Papa, can I write letters too? She asks. Of course, he says. You can write your own story. I take Papa's advice, sit down, and write my own story. It's hard to overstate just how meaningful such messages are when reading this with my own daughter. I'm not going to lie and say that stories about trains and unicorns and dinosaurs aren't also compelling to our little ones, but this is just an example of how far-reaching and promising I regard Danticat's influence on those coming after us. I'm going to take a page out of our own book, so to speak, and use her own words to offer a little background on our guest. And this comes from the author's note of this book. She writes, I grew up in a family that was separated in part by immigration. For most of my childhood, my parents were living with my aunt. For most of my childhood, my parents were living with my aunt. I was living with my aunt and uncle in Haiti. I knew that my parents wanted to send for us, but we were always told that they couldn't because they didn't have the right papers. This idea of having the right papers has always fascinated me. As children in Haiti, my brother and I sometimes played writing games, making up passports, visas, and other documents that might one day reunite us with our parents. Living in Miami now with two young daughters of my own, I meet a lot of children who are separated from either one or both of their parents because their parents are undocumented or, as Saya says, without papers. This book, Mama's Nightingale, is dedicated to those children who, like Saya, are dreaming of the day when their mother or father or both parents will come home. One place to find a wide selection of Danticat's essays on literature and politics is in the New Yorker, where she's published for almost 20 years. She graduated from Bard College with a BA in French literature, and in 1993 earned an MFA from Brown University, where she began work on her first novel, Breath, Eyes, Memory, an Oprah Book Club's selection. Here I'm going to proceed with a select listing of other titles. Crick Crack, a National Book Award finalist, The Farming of Bones, The Dew Breaker, and Claire of the Sea Light. She is editor of The Butterfly's Way, Voices from the Haitian Diaspora in the United States, Haiti Noir, and Haiti Noir 2, the second volume. She has written 6 books for children and young adults, Anacoana, Behind the Mountains, 8 Days, The Last Mapu, Mama's Nightingale, Untwine, as well as a travel narrative, After the Dance. Her memoir, Before I'm Dying, was a 2007 finalist for the National Book Award and the 2008 winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award for Autobiography. She's received the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction, a MacArthur Fellowship, and holds 2 honorary degrees from Smith and Yale University. Her work has been translated into various languages, including Japanese, French, Korean, German, Italian, Spanish, and Swedish. I have to brag and say that her memoir, Brother I'm Dying, was published in Portuguese as Adeus Haiti. In Colombia, the important daily El Espectador recently ran a glowing profile of her, using the title Migrante Literaria to connote her global profile. In some ways, and despite her already splendid achievements, we can only imagine that her international star is only going to shine brighter. As some already know, Danticat was a few months ago named the 25th laureate of the renowned Neustadt Prize for Literature. Popularly referred to as the American Nobel, the award recognizes outstanding literary merit worldwide. And here I'm going to conclude and say, as an unabashed fan, I think that I can again speak for us here in saying that that committee in Sweden better soon follow suit. I want to thank you, Edwidge, once again for your visit and welcome. And
good evening. Good evening. Can you hear okay? Thank you so much, Celso. You know you can jinx such things, right? Thank you for that beautiful introduction. Celso and I go way back to his graduate student days, where he invited Junot Diaz, and he and some friends invited Junot Diaz and myself to Berkeley, and we had a wonderful, wonderful time there. So thank you, and thank you all for coming. And I promise to get you home in time for the Olympics. So, I want to thank the Center for Latin American Studies. Thank you, Ted Fisher, Avery, and Colleen. And I've had a really wonderful visit here so far. I've met great people, wonderful faculty, staff, and I thank everybody who's fed me, spoken to me, everything in between. And I want to thank Andrea of the Nashville Public Library. I went there today and had an opportunity to read in the Civil Rights Room, which was extraordinary, the amount of history I was surrounded by. And there was a wonderful quote on the wall by Martin Luther King. I came to Nashville not to bring inspiration, but to gain inspiration from the great movement that has taken place in this community. So I say ditto. And also you guys, the center and everybody who's organized this visit, I thought are really, you plan really well, because I just feel like Haiti Week could not have come at a better time, both with the combination of Black History Month and the president's recent remarks, which I will deal also with in my remarks. And those remarks have sort of led me to rethinking about certain things, because the question of figuring out what to say and how to say it in really challenging times is something that I've tried to deal with in my essay collection, Create Dangerously, which is for me an ongoing exploration of being an artist and an immigrant, looking at both the present and the past. So this side of the water, which is the topic of the lecture, is a very poetic expression of both looking back and forward, looking back at history and what it can teach us while we are also dealing with the present. So the expression Lord Bordelot, which the other side of the water comes from, has always, for as long in my life that I've been exposed to it, meant Lord Bordelot can mean both migration and death. So when my parents left Haiti when I was 2, my dad when I was 2, my mom when I was 4, I was told that they were Lord Bordelot, which is on the other side of the water. And when my grandma died, I was told that she was Lord Bordelot really on the other side of the waters. And maybe the double meaning of Lord Bordelot comes from the fact that our initial migration enslaved ships was never meant never seeing our loved ones, which can be in itself a kind of death, while at the same time it also means that we're always in conversation with those who are on the other side, because there are two sides after all. So recently I've been having a conversation in my head with someone from the other side, Dr. Martin Luther King. And I know it seems like these days, especially in Black History Month, a cliche to talk about Dr. King. But for a while, I've felt connected to him on this side of the water in a singular way, which connects with the title of this lecture, This Side of the Water, Haiti, Life in the United States Today. So the subtitle of this recently updated talk is Good Samaritans, Martin Luther King, and Having the Place of Your Birth and the Lands of Your Ancestors, called a Shithole. Here goes. Some years, I celebrate my birthday on the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. Though he was born on January 15th and I on the 19th, based on the calendar, we might end up having kind words said about both of us on the same day. This year, though, was not one of those times. The Monday of the King holiday fell on his actual birthday, and mine followed, just as it should, 4 days later. For nearly a decade now, my birthday has been rather complicated. On January 12, 2010, a 7.0 magnitude earthquake struck my native Haiti, nearly destroying most of the capital, Port-au-Prince, and a few other cities nearby. That earthquake killed nearly 300,000 people and left 1.5 million homeless. Léogane, the town where my mother, my grandmother, and great-grandmother were born, was near the epicenter of the earthquake, and many of the people I knew there died. After the earthquake, January became an agonizing month to get through. Though it is a month that begins gloriously with the commemoration of Haitian independence on January 1st, a day when in my family and many other families, we drank a delicious squash soup, which was previously considered too luxurious for the enslaved and was consumed only by those who had enslaved us. On January 2nd, we celebrate Jour des Anciens, or Jour des Ancêtres, Heroes and Ancestors Day, a day on which we honor those who came before us, particularly the ones who fought and died for our independence. When I was a girl, on Heroes and Ancestors Day, I and the other children in my family would dress in our finest clothes and go visit our relatives who would treat us to a piece of cake and a small dose of a bright red, syrupy-filled liqueur, we called it liqueur, and a few coins, which we called zétrines, which after many such visits throughout the day would end up in such a financial windfall that we would think ourselves very, very rich. January 6 was Lewa, Three Kings Day, or the Feast of the Epiphany, which honors the Day of the Magi, the day that the Magi arrived with their gifts for the baby Jesus. January 6 also meant the end of the Christmas season and a return to school or work. But by then, many people in Haiti we're already thinking about Carnival, which would follow in a few weeks. Next week is Carnival, if you still want to go. January 12th, though, like the King holiday, falls between those observances and my birthday, turning the first weeks of the first month of every year into a series of both life-affirming celebrations mixed with commemoration of death. Both January 12th and 15 are days now when I stop to honor the dead. My cousin Maxo and his son Nono are my closest relatives who died in the earthquake, but I also lost many friends and more distant family members. It might not seem fitting to put Maxo and Nono on the same plane as Dr. King, but Dr. King's life and death and the King holiday are not just about Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King's life and death are also about the demise of thousands who came before him, his own heroes and ancestors, as well as those who fought alongside him, those whose blood also soaked this land, which immigrants like me now call home. And both his life and death are, of course, as he so clearly expressed in so many of his speeches, about the future, about all of our future. The first King holiday was observed on January 20th, 1986, the day after I turned 17. On that birthday, I went to church with my parents and 3 brothers, and afterwards we went to a Chinese restaurant for lunch. The following morning, in spite of it being a holiday, my mother went to her job at a handbag factory, while my father went to his as a freelance, what we then call a gypsy cab driver, but what you now call Uber. My parents rarely had any time off except Sundays. My brothers and I watched the first King holiday observances on television. There were marches in many cities around the United States. In Atlanta, after laying a wreath on Dr. King's grave with Coretta Scott King, then Vice President George Bush attended services at Ebenezer Baptist Church, Dr. King's home church, alongside with Bishop Desmond Tutu, who received the King Peace Prize for fighting apartheid in South Africa. Apartheid had not yet ended in South Africa. Nelson Mandela was still in jail. "We are going to be free," Bishop Tutu declared. "We know we are going to be free, and when we are free, we will remember who helped us to be free." Dr. King was certainly one of those who wanted to see South Africa free. In a December 10th, 1965 address at Hunter College, his written remarks began as follows: "Africa has been depicted for more than a century as the home of black cannibals and ignorant primitives. Despite volumes of facts controverting this picture, the stereotype persists in books, motion pictures, and other media and communication. Africa does have particular savages," he said, "and brutes, but they are not black. They are the sophisticated white rulers of South Africa who profess to be cultured, religious, and civilized, but whose conduct and philosophy stamp them unmistakably as modern-day barbarians," end quote. In April of that same year, the United States had just invaded the Dominican Republic over fears of communist expansion in the region. It was the second invasion of Haiti's eastern neighbor in the 20th century, the first having been a joint occupation of the entire island of Hispaniola between 1916 and 1924. "We inundated that small nation with overwhelming force," Dr. King said, "shocking the world with our zealousness and naked power." Dr. King, with respect to South Africa, though, he said, "Our protest is so muted and peripheral, it merely mildly disturbs the sensibility of the segregationist, while our trade and investments substantially stimulate their economy to greater heights." Dr. King called for the United States, along with the Soviet Union, France, Germany, and other democratic nations, to boycott South Africa, along with Portugal, because of the atrocities committed against the resistant forces in Portugal's African colonies during their war for independence, particularly in Angola and Mozambique. Concerning South Africa in particular, Dr. King added, quote, "No real national interest impels us to be cautious, gentle, or a good customer of a nation that offends the world's conscience. The world's conscience, he seemed to suggest, should be offended by all types of injustice, no matter the victim nor the source. The struggle for freedom, he said, forms one long front crossing oceans and mountains. I thought of these words on January 11th of this year, on the eve of the 8th anniversary of the catastrophic earthquake in Haiti. I might not have been thinking of that particular speech had the President of the United States not have been reported to have called El Salvador, Haiti, and several countries in Africa, quote, shithole countries. A few weeks before that, the President was reported to have said that all Haitians have AIDS and that 40,000 Nigerian visa recipients would never, quote, go back to their huts after seeing the United States. On a day that we were supposed to be mourning our dead, Haitians and Haitian Americans found themselves responding to the President on whatever platform was available to them: radio, newspapers, television, the streets, and social media. On January 12th, an earthquake commemoration procession starting in a square with a statue of the Haitian independence hero Toussaint Louverture and Miami's Little Haiti neighborhood turned into a demonstration with Haitian men, women, and children decrying the president's alleged racist remarks. Haitian Ambassador Paul Altidore, who just weeks earlier had published an opinion piece in the New York Times titled, "Our Country Deserves Your Respect, Not Your Pity," made several television appearances reminding American viewers that Haiti and the United States were the first two republics in the Western Hemisphere, and that the two countries had strong historical ties, and that Haitian soldiers fought alongside American troops in the American Revolutionary War. Ambassador Altidore also highlighted the contributions of Haitians and Haitian Americans to today's America, ranging from your taxi drivers to hotel workers, teachers, politicians, artists, entertainers, and medical and military personnel. He also mentioned that the first non-Native American settler of Chicago, Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable, was of Haitian descent, as was, he said, W.E.B. Du Bois, the African-American intellectual and co-founder of the NAACP. During an address at Carnegie Hall on February 23, 1968, on what would have been Du Bois's 100th birthday, Dr. King called Du Bois one of the most remarkable men of our time. Dr. Du Bois was not only an intellectual giant exploring the frontiers of knowledge, Dr. King said, he was in the first place a teacher, and one idea he insistently taught was that black people have been kept in oppression and deprivation by a poisonous fog of lies that depicts them as inferior, end quote. I happened to be at a conference with a group of writers and intellectuals from the Caribbean when the president's statement was reported, and a few of them thought that his words were so contemptible that they did not merit a response. Others thought that exalting Haiti's revolutionary past, including the fact that France's defeat during Haiti's battle for independence is what led to the Louisiana Purchase, as well as lauding Haiti's great visual art, music and literature, entrepreneurs, our ambitions as big and small dreamers, workers. They thought that was a complete waste of time because it would neither lead the president to changing his mind about Haiti nor apologizing. They thought it was also useless to try to prove our humanity to someone who'd refer to white supremacists as very fine people, while denigrating others whose only crimes were being born in countries who, in many cases, who had their natural resources and human resources plundered by a string of colonizers, imperialists, and invaders, including the United States. I did not plan to respond directly to the president. I felt that along with many other prominent Haitian Americans, and Haiti-loving people, the ambassador also had done that. I wanted to write something, though, that my nieces and nephews who were born in the United States and had never been to Haiti, as well as my own daughters who had traveled to Haiti many times and held their own version of Haiti within them, I wanted to write something that would counter for them what the president had allegedly said about the homeland of their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. I was also seeing how the president's remarks about Haiti were forming a particularly sinister immigration policy. In November 2017, the Trump administration ended temporary protected status for nearly 60,000 Haitians, leaving them open to deportation as early as next year. Soon after, 250,000 Salvadorians faced the same fate, and while the president was allegedly bemoaning the fact that the United States was not welcoming enough immigrants from Norway. A few days after the president's belittling remarks, the Department of Homeland Security announced that Haitians would no longer be eligible for H-2A and H-2B visas, which are available to low-skilled migrants, including seasonal agricultural workers. The president's views were not simply being expressed, but they were being actively acted upon. I also wanted to respond because in October 2004, my 81-year-old Uncle Joseph, a cancer survivor who spoke with a voice box, died in immigration custody after fleeing Haiti following a brutal United Nations forces attack on his neighborhood. My uncle had a valid U.S. visa, but Immigration and Customs Enforcement at Miami International Airport detained him after he requested asylum. They took away his medication. As his health deteriorated, he was accused of faking his illness. And eventually, he was taken to a local hospital's prison ward where he died shackled to a bed, 5 days arriving in the United States. This is the subject of my memoir, Brother, I'm Dying. And I interrogate myself a lot on this book on this point. Did my uncle die because he was Haitian? Did he die because he was black? If he were white, Cuban, anything other than Haitian, would he have been detained, given terrible medical care until he died? Perhaps I'm fooling myself, but I imagine that had one of those people my uncle encountered on his way to death, from the immigration officer at the airport who ordered that he be detained, to the medic who accused him of faking the illness that killed him, I tell myself that had these people been a little more empathetic, had they known just a little bit more about him as a person, had they known a little bit more about Haiti, about the American Revolutionary War, and the Louisiana Purchase, and Jean-Baptiste Point-du-Sable, and Dubois, and Haitian art, and music, and literature, and food, and even carnival, perhaps my uncle's life might have been saved. Of course, this is part of the magical thinking that comes with grief. This year, on the Martin Luther King holiday, the president's derogatory remarks were on many people's minds, including Dr. King's children. When a president insists that our nation needs more citizens from white countries like Norway, I don't even think we need to spend any time even talking about what it says and what it is, Dr. King's eldest son, Martin Luther King III, told the Associated Press. Our collective voice in this hour must always be louder than the one who sometimes does not reflect the legacy of my father, Dr. King's daughter, the Reverend Bernice King, told a congregation at the Ebenezer Baptist Church. That same day, thousands of Haitians marched. In New York, hundreds gathered for a rally at Times Square. Mayor Bill de Blasio spoke at the rally, expressing his support. In Miami, Haitians and Haitian Americans walked on Martin Luther King Boulevard during the Martin Luther King Day Parade, a festive pageant full of local dance troupes and high school marching bands, a celebration I have attended many times with my family. In West Palm Beach, near Mar-a-Lago, where the president was spending yet another long weekend, about 500 Asian and Haitian American demonstrators demanded an apology. According to the Florida Sun-Sentinel, the organizer of the protest, a Haitian American radio host named James Leger, said, "If Dr. Martin Luther King were alive today, he would be marching with us." I don't know that Dr. King, if he were alive, would have had the energy to show up at every protest or march, but he most likely would not have remained silent in the face of such an insult from the President of the United States. This is also why I responded to these remarks in 2 radio interviews and a lengthy Facebook post denouncing what was said and exalting indeed the virtues of the country of my birth and those of my heroes and ancestors. My Uncle Joseph, who died shackled to a bed in a prison ward in Miami, was like Dr. King, a Baptist minister, as I think was the first black student enrolled at this university, Bishop Joseph Johnson. In Bel Air, the poor neighborhood where my uncle lived for 50 years, he ran a church, a health clinic, and a school. My Uncle Joseph was born in Léogâne in 1923, when Haiti was, along with the Dominican Republic, under U.S. occupation, and my uncle died under U.S. control as a prisoner of the Department of Homeland Security. One of my uncle's favorite Bible stories was about the Good Samaritan. It's a story I realize appeals to a lot of preachers, both the less political kind and the more radical, because it is one of the best illustrations we have of the golden rule, to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. These days, America's golden rule, as stated by the current president, is America first. Perhaps this was always the case, but in the 37 years of living in this country, I have never heard it stated, implied, and encouraged as often as it is now, that putting America first means openly stepping on the bodies, souls, and dignity and dreams of others. It has never been so clear to me that in the realm of immigration, it means having no qualms about separating spouses from each other and children from their parents. Families are now considered chains, as in chain migration, a term reminiscent of the slave trade, during which our ancestors were transported against their will from our mother continent to others, yes, in chains. Trump's fixation with Haiti is not incidental, nor is the U.S. president's fixation with Haiti anything new. After Haiti gains its independence during a former bloody 12-year slave uprising, resulting in the January 1st celebration, the first January 1st celebration in 1804, Thomas Jefferson called Haiti's leaders cannibals and wrote about the potential impact of the Haitian uprising on the enslaved population in the United States. If something is not done soon, we shall be the murderers of our own children, he said. It would take 6 decades for the U.S. to acknowledge Haiti's independence. By the time Abraham Lincoln did in 1862, America was already at war with itself on the issue of slavery. Haiti, burdened by its post-independence isolation and the 100 million francs in payment it was forced to give France for official recognition, an amount estimated to be nearly $22 billion today, the country began its perilous slide towards turmoil and dependency, resulting in a 19-year U.S. occupation and 2 subsequent interventions in the past 100 years. So Trump's narrative of Haiti as dystopia, black dystopia, is nothing new. When I think of my uncle and Dr. King together as 2 ministers whom I respect, I think of both their Good Samaritan sermons. My uncle, who died for the lack of a Good Samaritan in his path, had often preached about this traveling stranger who was beaten and robbed, then left for dead, a man who was first ignored by some passers-by, but then was rescued by the compassionate Samaritan who took him to a safe place and paid for his shelter. My uncle used to stretch that we have to be good Samaritans because we are just as likely to be in the place of this traveling stranger, and if we act as if those who are considered outsiders, who have fallen on hard times or are in need of help, if we act as though they are vile, guilty, or undeserving of empathy, then we have also reduced our own humanity. Dr. King's Good Samaritan sermon echoes my uncle's somewhat, but goes even further in a way that I find as radical as choosing to love under impossible circumstances. I often return to this vision of empathy, sympathy, and compassion for one's neighbors, and the courage it takes not only to declare ourselves our brothers and sisters' keeper, but to actually act on the notion. Dr. King delivered his Good Samaritan sermon to a group of striking sanitation workers on the eve, the day before he died, on April 3rd, 1968. Those who had not stopped to help the man who'd been left to die on the side of the road might have been asking themselves a whole series of questions, he said. They had found the traveler on a very dangerous road. What was he doing there? Might he have been faking being hurt in order to trap them? The ones who did not stop to help might have asked themselves, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? But the Good Samaritan asked himself, if I do not help this man, what will happen to him? It's hard to know exactly what will happen to the most vulnerable of immigrants now, the ones who come from the countries the president has disparaged, as well as those being shut out of the president's ban on refugees, particularly those from predominantly Muslim countries, and those who are already in the United States, the thousands who can no longer count on temporary protected status, and the youth who were brought here by their parents as children and whose DACA safeguards are in limbo. Let us not forget the 11 million undocumented immigrants who have been living in the shadows for so long that they might be too afraid to accept help from Good Samaritans for fear that they might be reported and deported. As long as this assault of words and actions continue, we might soon be put in the position of having to offer our bodies as sanctuary, especially as more local municipalities are turning undocumented people over to immigration officers, or as men, women, and children are being dragged out of cars, buses, trains, or out of their own homes, or are being captured while walking down the street. Recently I had to do a Know Your Rights presentation, like video for people who might be in that situation. And it's very empowering because they're telling people when the ICE agent comes to your door, don't open the door. If they call you, don't go. And I'm always thinking, and my heart was beating even as I was saying that, wondering if people would have the courage to actually follow through, actually what are their rights when when the immigration force is facing you. So while we find the courage to be the kind of Good Samaritan, like Dr. King and so many others, including those who participated in the Nashville sit-ins here and all the history here, while we find the courage that these brave people somehow called upon themselves, these people who asked themselves, what will happen if we do not help? What will happen to us? What will happen to them? What will happen to us, and that what will happen to our souls, to our dignity, to this place that we call home. To return now to this metaphor of water, I will close with a short reading from an essay in Create Dangerously called A Year and a Day. In the Haitian Vodou tradition, it is believed by some that the souls of the nearly dead slip into rivers and streams and remain there under the water for a year and a day. Then, lured by ritual prayer and song, the souls emerge from the water and the spirits are reborn. These spirits go on to occupy trees, and if you listen closely, you may hear their hushed whispers in the wind. These spirits can also hover over mountain ranges and in grottos and caves where familiar voices echo our own when we call out for help. The Year and a Day commemoration is seen in families that believe in it and practice it as a tremendous obligation and honorable duty, in part because it assures a transcendental continuity of the kind that has kept us Haitians, no matter where we live, linked to our ancestors for generations. In Haiti, people never really die, my grandmothers used to say, which seems strange because people were always dying. But my grandmothers were talking about souls, which never really die, even when the visual and verbal manifestation of their transition the tombstones and mausoleum, the elaborate wakes and church services, the prayers that encourage the body to surrender the spirit, the mourning rituals of all religions become a luxury, like so much else, like a home, like bread, like clean water. Haiti has now lost nearly 10,000 people to cholera, an epidemic that is born out of water. This epidemic, which was introduced into one of Haiti's largest rivers by the fecal waste of United Nations forces, has affected nearly 1 million lives. Cholera has turned water, this fragile veil, this link between life and death, this connection to our ancestors and to a feared poison, and a river once filled with life becomes a grave. 8 years ago, watching the crumbled buildings and crushed bodies that were shown around American television, I thought I was witnessing the darkest moment in the history of the country where I was born and where most of my family members still live. Then I heard one of the survivors, either on radio or on television, say that during the earthquake, it was as if the earth had become liquid, like water. That's when I began to imagine them, all these thousands and thousands of souls slipping into the country's rivers and streams, then waiting out their year and a day before re-emerging and claiming their places among us. And briefly, I was hopeful. My hope came not only from the possibility of their and our communal rebirth, but from the extra day that often follows the close of difficult years. That extra day is what sustains me now. That extra day has always sustained us against insults, against history, against trials, and to triumph. That extra day guarantees nothing except that it will lead into the following year and the one after that and the one after that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we have opportunities to ask questions. And if you could just please raise your hand. Alma here looks like she has the mic, and we'll walk over to you and to you.
Hello, Ms. Danticat. Thank you so much for your talk. And my name is Magana Kabugi. I'm actually a Kenyan American. I'm a third-year PhD student here at Vanderbilt. And I'm in the English department, and I'm wondering, as educators, how do we get our students, and particularly Black students who are interested in issues of civil rights and social justice, how do we get students to think diasporically and sort of not see themselves within a sort of American cocoon, but sort of see the movement for freedom and social justice as interconnected around the world, and especially around the sort of global Black world?
I think you have to certainly have the willingness first, right? Because you, as a teacher, I think of myself going into college. We didn't know all the things we know now, right? In ways that we're connected. And I often say to my students, many things like things like in the civil rights movement, things that we consider in the past, they're happening right now to someone in the diaspora who somewhere else. And to start making these connections, I think it starts with the teachers in terms of the text that you lead them to. And I've been and even writing, this was just kind of a longer text that I'm working on, what I talked about, just kind of like diving into the archives at the King Center that, thank God, is digitalized because there's so much of it. And I came, for example, across, there was a very small Haitian organization in New York that wrote this letter to Dr. King asking him to come speak at their annual dinner. And it was also good to see that connection and to see that he was so forceful on South Africa. But I think that connection has to be made both in joy and in struggle, right? So that at the same time that your students are thinking more diaspora, like thinking, if they're thinking about Haiti, they're thinking about I'm insulted for Haiti and the struggle for Haiti, but it's also good to know about what's wonderful about Haiti, right? And those like the Haitian, those great things that we have in common and these connections that we can make. So for example, when I remember when I was in college and I saw Daughters of the Dust, I felt like, oh my God, that's me. And there were so many things like the games they were playing, and I thought, gosh, I didn't know we had that too in common. So I think things like that also not to stay on sort of the sad parts, also to make those connections and joy as well.
Sak pase.
Naboulé.
Piti piti.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm so hurt. I'm hurt because this country, my parents came here to give us a better life, and it's hurtful. And I remember after hearing those remarks, it was just one of those things. I remember trying to go to sleep and thinking about, well, why did we come here? My parents worked 2-3 jobs. My dad worked so hard to get a taxi cab medallion. And he held on to that thing. Like my father now, that's all he talks about, of how hard he worked to get that. And I don't know how to tell my nieces and nephews, they grew up here in the States. I grew up in Haiti. Your story's like mine. I came here when I was 13. In the middle of the night, midnight, we jumped on a plane and we left. And I just sit back. I'm a nurse here at Vanderbilt, and someone told me you're here, and I remember reading Crick Crat, and I was like, oh, I know who she is. I want to see her. I want to talk to her because your story's just like mine. How do I don't know how to tell my nieces and nephews how beautiful our country was when we were growing up, and now how beautiful it's turning. I went to Pétionville last year, and I didn't even know where I was. And what is it as a culture, as a Haitian woman, what can I do here in the United States to bring the beautifulness of my people here? And it's not that my parents escaped to not go back. Every year we had to pack up and go back. Now as an adult, I go back. After the earthquake, I've lost 13 family members. One of them was a 5-year-old child that they heard cry for 30 days.
Wow.
And I'm like, 30 days that, and I mean, it's just one of those things, like, I don't know what to do. I'm just hurt. I'm hurt.
Yeah. Well, what you're doing now is powerful too. You're sharing your stories. And like I said in that piece, I did really feel like I knew my children, because they had seen Haiti, that wouldn't become sort of their narrative. Like they know that Haiti definitely has challenges, but that it's, no place is supposed to be described that way by like a person they call the leader of the free world, or anybody, right? And so, but I was really concerned, like you're, about children who had never seen Haiti and were sort of like Haitian children who are gathering this narrative together. So I think it's just, and then you're trapped because people are like people were telling me like, oh, who cares what he says and all of that. But people were hurt like you are. But I think part of our hurt also is the fact that as I think that we feel like we can do better too, right? And that I feel like part of my hurt was like I didn't want us to be in a position where someone could say that about us, even if they're evil. Do you know what I mean? And so I felt like part of it was also like, gosh, I wish we weren't in this position. I wish that our people weren't migrating and being rejected all over the world. I wish, like, that the reality also is rather painful. So I think we also need, as Haitian people, to put that hurt somewhere, and not just to sit in it, but to make it work, right? To to contribute as much as we can, and let that be, as vile as it is, a motivator for us to, to help the country.
How are you doing?
Thank you. Hi.
TPS, explain to me exactly how this works in terms of people who lose protective status. How do we they have a train and throw them on the train and whatever, or do they buy tickets? I mean, how does this work? Because I don't understand how we're going to,
Okay.
or how they are going to remove all these people who are part of the fabric of our country now. Just explain to me the technicalities of how that works.
Well, temporary protected status, usually a country will get temporary protected status if there's been a national disaster or some situation, maybe like a war in the country that prevents people from going back. So usually the people who get to temporary protected status are people who are already here and cannot go back. And so when they remove it, now many of these people will have no status. Right? And I think it's perhaps, the hope is perhaps like Mitt Romney said that some will self-deport. They're probably like hoping that people's lives will be so hard that they will leave on their own volition. But other people, then if you don't have papers, you can't drive. You can't get a driver's license. Then they'll be out of status, and that makes them vulnerable. Like they could be, if they, let's say they get in an accident, or any time that they come into contact with law enforcement, if there's, let's say something is let's say someone could be being abused, they won't be able to call the police, because if the police come, they might find out, then you're just walking around very much exposed. And some of these people are teachers, some of them are, and so it's not going to be, they won't be, we hope, chased down, but every time they have an encounter with someone, and because there's no sanctuary, so if once you're in, at least in Miami where I'm, as soon as you come in contact with law enforcement, then they can report you to immigration, and then you can be deported.
So when is the date?
What they're doing, they're giving people, they said 18 months to basically get yourself together, even if you leave, or it would be sometime early next year they would completely expire. So if they don't have another status, so if they don't, if they're not married to a U.S. citizen, or if they don't have change their status some other way, then they will fall out of status.
Hello. My name is Mayaba Makende. I'm a Cameroonian immigrant, and I'm a first year. I'm sorry. I'm a first year here at Vanderbilt University, and in one of my immigration class, we're talking about like the lottery visa, / the diversity visa, and how it has bipartisan support in the Congress to have it completely removed because it's seen as being like a security measure. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying that I got to this country by the lottery visa, which allows the majority of the people that are using are Africans, Eastern Europeans, and Southeast Asians that come to the United States. So my question is about the feeling of rejections when your allies, both Democratic and Republicans, are in support of a system that is going to make sure that a large portion of your countrymen who don't have any other ways of attending this great country and benefiting from its great resources support a bill that's going to eliminate their chances of ever looking for a better life outside of their country of birth, and how it feels like when they see a threat in your existence here, yet they claim to be your ally.
Mm-hmm. The question is, what?
The feeling of rejection? Yeah, haven't you feel the rejections when your allies, like both Democratic and Republicans, are in support of a bill, are in support of it? I guess so I guess that's where the feeling of rejection comes in, having to come to terms with the fact that they're in support of eliminating a program that's going to stop people like me from coming to this country.
Yeah, well, I think like the feeling of rejection is the least of it. I know people who are just trying to figure out, what am I going to do with my kid? With my US-born kid, will I take my kid to Haiti? Will I, so the feelings is the least of it. And people who have lived in this sort of precarious state for a while, they know it's like the gentleman said, like you really don't have friends. People have interests, right? And Trump showed up in Little Haiti and said to the people, "I'll be your champion." I guess he's redefined the meaning of champion for them. But politicians do what they feel like is going to get them reelected, and some of them have good hearts and so forth. But it's really, I can't stress enough. Like I live in Miami, which has one of the largest Haitian populations in the United States, and how people are just terrified that you're going to walk down the street and like the ICE will pull up and take you. And so I feel like it's like the rejection is the least of it. It's just like some very big survival issues, and people are being told to make make contingency plans for your family, like so they know what to do if you get picked up and by immigration, how to find you. And so it's that urgent out there, so that it's just very scary for a lot of people. So it's beyond what you're asking me. Yeah.
Thank you very much. How would you define hope? Are you hopeful? Are you optimistic? I hate to put it on a personal level, but what do you see happening in the next 4 or 5 years, let alone immediately in the next 18 months? Are you a hopeful person? You have children. You have 2 girls. Could you share that with us, please?
Well, I just recently was watching an interview with James Baldwin, where someone asked him, "Are you hopeful?" And he says, "Well, I have to be hopeful because I'm alive." And so one has to, you have to hope to be able to get up in the morning, but it feels that you also have to. It feels like, I'm speaking very personally, like you have to earn more and more the right to be hopeful, right? Where we live in a moment where everybody wakes up and grabs the phone and think, "Oh, is the world still here?" So it takes a little more energy, I think, to be hopeful. But of course, we have to be hopeful. Like I have children, and one of my biggest lessons of hope comes from Haiti, and there's several examples of it. But I remember going back after the earthquake, and I was part of a program where a group of people went, because there were so many school teachers out of work, and a group of people would, friends and others, started an organization called Li, Read, Read, Read. And so they would hire these school teachers who were living in the tent camps to read to the children in the tent camp. And it was a very informal thing, but the school hadn't started yet, and the parents would dress the children so beautifully to come to these sessions. And I would look at those children and I think that's the definition of hope, that people who are in a very precarious situation, they didn't know where they were going to go, they had no home, but they had these children, and whatever clothes they had left, and they dressed them up, and they put beautiful ribbons in their hair, and they came for like a 1-hour storytelling session. So to me, that is hope. That's hope, and that's hope manifested. And so I can't be hopeless because of examples like that, and also the history of struggle that we had, and seeing what people have managed to do in situations that seemed hopeless. And we're here because someone some of us are here because someone in the hull of a slave ship refused to die. And so that makes me hopeful.
Firstly, thank you, Professor Danticat, both for your talk and for your books. I'm an immigrant like many others in this room. I'm also a New Yorker, so I've grown up surrounded by other immigrants. Upon moving to the South, I think is one of the first times that I had to, I'm a third year here in English in the PhD program, and upon moving to the South, it was one of the first times I really had to contend with the serious tensions that I think exist between African Americans and other immigrant populations. And you've pulled from a variety of sources for your talk, one being obviously Martin Luther King, and I think you've kind of both in some ways proposed radical action, but also proposed unity. Not so much a revision of unity, but perhaps a call for more unification. And I'm wondering if you've been thinking about radical action, what would radical action look like? What would a radical action look like on the ground in terms of unification of the diaspora? Perhaps in more ways than we've already seen it. I'd appreciate any words you have on this.
Well, one thing I'll approach that because by seeing things that I have seen, for example, in Miami, I think where I live, it used to be that sort of people who were dreamers, like the immigration people dealt with their immigration rallies. So if you went to an immigration rally, you would see mostly immigrants, right? And then after, like death of Trayvon Martin, who's from Miami, who went to a high school not too far from where I am, and others, and all the other deaths, then you would see, kids who were Black Lives Matter and the DACA kids were together. And that was always, that to me felt new and powerful, like the dreamers with the dream defenders, and we are seeing more and more of that. I think, and maybe one of the silver lining of this moment is that it will highlight for us the need for unity. How the white supremacists hate us all. Newsflash. They don't hate you less because you're a black immigrant from somewhere else. And so I think we can have more, maybe we're starting to realize that we can have more progress, that we can do more together than apart, that we don't have to stay here in our separate struggles. And a college campus is a good place, I think, where people meet and try to come together and then decide what radical action is for them in the environment that they live in, and what they need to respond to, and what they need to react to, and what they need to demand change. But the things that are happening now, people seeing, that are grouped under these headings now, sort of this, they might have seen themselves completely separate, and hey, someone else is doing it for you, and so you might as well struggle together,
Thank you for coming to Nashville again. Thank you for all your works, and you're just so inspiring. I'm just wondering if you have any ideas about how to inspire. I have this nephew who I'm sure reflects a lot of young people who just graduated, who just feels like nothing. What's the point? He doesn't feel like he should vote because what's the point? He doesn't have a voice. And I remember way back when I was in graduate school, having friends from South Africa and thinking, why didn't you all leave? And having friends whose ancestors were in Germany at the time of the Second World War and thinking, you know, what did your families do? And I'm realizing that I'm living through a time where, you know, everything is so precarious. I can't imagine the anxiety that people must feel who are, you know, dreamers and who are in those kinds of even more precarious situations. So I don't know how to begin to inspire these people who feel like their vote doesn't matter, their voice doesn't matter, nothing matters, because, I mean, they don't feel that connectedness to everyone else. I grew up in the Virgin Islands hearing Calypsonians like, was it Chalk Dust who said, and I paraphrase, he said something like, the only difference between one African American and any other descendant of African peoples are that, you know, they got their ancestors were placed on a different slave ship. That's all, and so there was always a sense of unity, even though there were the silos of this island versus that island. But I don't know how to even begin to get that across to the young people nowadays who just feel like nothing matters. What's the point? When things are so precarious right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it must be so hard to be a very young person these days, right? To have come out of 8 years of sort of this historical presidency and then to come into this one, right? They must, on some level, feel jolted, and hopefully we hope in a different way. But some of them, I think, need a little time to take it in. But also, so much of what we're hearing is demoralizing. It's insulting. For example, the White House Chief of Staff calling the DACA kids lazy, right? Saying, oh, I wish they would get off there. When most of those kids are paying for their own education because they can't get aid, they can't get in-state tuition, so they have to work. And then, you know, I know a kid who was working, he was working in a hotel room at night, and then the daytime was doing the parking, and then would go to class on the weekend. And because they you know, they're fighting so hard, and to call them lazy. But if you're a kid and all this is coming, I worry about the young children these days, right? Because everything we tell them is wrong, is a sort of in the public space. And so I think for some young people it's demoralizing, but we need to put your nephew with her so she can talk to him about radical action, you know, and we really, I think we really have to do that kind of, but a lot of young people are going to be demoralized. They're going to be like, what's the point? Because you told me if you do all the right things, you'll end up this place. And these people who end up at the top of the pyramid have done all the wrong things and keep insulting everybody. So I think it's much harder to motivate young people, except we just hope that they can see, you know, this outcome proves that you need to vote, right? That elections have consequences, and maybe he'll be stirred up by the next round.
In my response to the lady that just spoke, well, I'm upset about this even when you were talking, but I think with our kids as African Americans is that you need to teach your kids the history. If you don't know where you come from, and like with my kids, I was born in the 50s, so you know I was in the 60s thing. So we were able to get great jobs. And some of the parents, to me, do not educate their kids about the past. So they think everything's just all rosy. But that is not the case. And I think that's, for a lot of our kids, not my kids, because I taught them from kids, even my grandkids, and I'm going to work on my great-grandkids to let them know what the past was like, what my grandparents went through, my great-grandparents. So I want them to know that I think that is a problem with a lot of children of color. they don't know their history. You know, they don't know where they came from. I mean, even if you were born here in the United States, you still need to know about your grandparents, your great-grandparents. And I think that's a problem. And, you know, it hurts me because a lot of our kids don't know. But I educated my grandkids, so they have a different attitude about things. They're realists. And we just can't let our kids walk around thinking that everything is, that you're equal. I'll use that word. That you're equal, because that's not true. We as African Americans, I don't like that. We have to work harder. We have to be smarter, you know, to accomplish things that maybe people of other colors, maybe Caucasians or whatever. And I'm not doing the race card thing. I'm just being realistic about choices for black kids in America. And if we as parents and the community don't teach these kids, they'll be lost. And you have to let them know their history. But I'm kind of full. I've enjoyed this. I really have. And I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that the history point is so crucially important, because also it's not as easy to feel denigrated when you know the people you come from and what they've survived and what they've overcome and what they've thrived to. I completely agree with that. And even going today to the civil rights room in the library and looking around and to see that, you know, the strength of that. Young kids, you know, these babies who are integrating schools. I mean, that's something important, like a child to know. It's a powerful thing for a child to look in that, like to know the story of Ruby Bridges and all these, and to say, that little girl was my age. And where did that power come from? I want some of that. And I think that history part is very, very important.
I think a lot. So for me, like how I learned about civil rights, because coming from a country that it's majority black folks. So when you come to the U.S., it's just like, okay, I don't understand why I'm being treated different. And I remember, you know, someone mentioning like, you know, you can't sit over there because they don't want the black kids sitting over there. And this is in New York City. And I remember my parents, oh, don't, you know, be careful with white people, be careful. Anything that was going on, it was always a be careful. But one of the things I must say, like, I think as an adult, I go and seek it and search for it. I was watching something on PBS and they were just like, oh yeah, the Woolworth the Woolworth counter. And I didn't even know that in the library here there was a big so I went and I sought it out and I went to go see, and I've watched probably more things that I needed to watch about it. And as I'm mentioning to one of my friends, and his dad went to Tuskegee, and he starts telling me about his history. And I sit back and I'm just like, wow, I did not know. So for them, a portion of their history was he was at Tuskegee, where he tried to go to one of the white schools. They wouldn't take him, and he wanted to become an engineer. And he figured, how am I going to become an engineer? Attends Tuskegee, and he got involved in all the civil rights movements, started the freedom bus rides and everything else. And he just says, you know, being black in America now and way back when, it's still the same thing. And the only difference is people hide it. And the only way you could overcome it is to actually seek it. You have to know what's going on. You have to be aware. You have to have your eyes open. And, you know, with this president, you start seeing all the people that you might have thought might have been like, hey, you're all right with me. And it's just like, wow, how could we let this happen? I see it in my country where I don't even know where the clear line of leadership is. In Jacmel, we have our own government. Do you feel that in America we've completely lost what democracy is all about? Because I feel like people can't vote anymore. There are people that have been in the Senate for 50 some hard years, and you can't get rid of them.
So it's just like, do you feel like we've lost ourselves in the word for word of the Constitution, or the word for word, like everything seems to be like, well, I've been here for 40 years, so that's what we're going to do.
Well, that question, as President Obama once said, is above my pay grade. but I think one of the things I think is very powerful in what you were saying about seeking information for yourself, I think it's so important for black immigrants to the United States. And that goes back to your question of the tensions, right? Toni Morrison says that one way that people become white in America is by almost assuming white supremacy. And sometimes we do that too as black immigrants. Like, we're like, oh, why can't they get them? So like we start like parroting those things that people are saying. So I love that notion of just like going and seeking out, just as we love it when people seek out our history, In Haiti, and I feel like Haiti, the history of Haiti, there's so many places where the history of Haiti and the history of African Americans meet, like in New Orleans, for example, where so many post-independence, a lot of Haitians ended up and really influenced that culture, and that's like where we meld, like a really cool place where we meld. So I am for that seeking out, and whether it's even questioning the whole notion of what, how democracy, like, because in Haiti you would have like an invasion to restore democracy, and so now it's like, oh, this democracy, is this the one you mean, Yeah, I mean, it's informing ourselves it's very important. Just as we want other people to better know our history and appreciate it and acknowledge it, I think it's also, as new arrivals or long-term residents of this country, it behooves us to learn more of that history and the struggle that allows us to have, as Black diasporic people, the liberties we have here.
With that, we want to iterate our thanks to everybody for your wonderful questions, engagement. Edwidge, thank you so much once more. We'll have, thank you. So please join us outside the book signing and